Thank you very much. Before I go to member questions and comments, which I'll do in just a moment, I just want to give it kind of an overview of some thoughts that I have. I think everybody is starting to have a greater and greater appreciation of the role of groundwater basins and the importance of groundwater in California. It is sort of the last refuge for us to go to as we have tapped to surface water. Um, we're relying on more water than can be delivered in terms of surface water, and groundwater is unfortunately not being used currently at a sustainable rate, and that causes all kinds of problems for us, not the least of which is our final reserve. It's like a family drawing down the bank account. Eventually you draw that thing down and you have lots of problems that come as a result of that. So in terms of overview, I'd like to point out the challenges that I see with Sigma at this point in time, and I offer these as overviews, and I want to complement what particularly Mr. Goslin, you and your department are doing in terms of trying to implement Sigma. But it seems like we have a technical knowledge shortage. Underground basins are complicated. It's very hard for everybody to understand them. If the general public saw, if you took the underground basins and you could reveal it all, then they saw how many new. I think about the reservoir we have in our area that everybody drives by every day and sees the reservoir. And when that reservoir goes down, well, the phone starts ringing off the hook. But it doesn't happen with a groundwater basin, right? And if somebody suddenly started putting pipes down into the reservoir, running down the hills, everybody go, "What are those pipes doing?" Right? It doesn't happen when thousands of new wells go into groundwater basins since Sigma was passed. So technical knowledge is a gap that we have to try to fill. And I appreciate the comments of LAO and appreciate the efforts of the department to try to help fill those for local agencies. That's one. Two, funding. Groundwater sustainability agencies have the ability to raise fees, but it is very difficult for local agencies to actually, just from a political standpoint, get that done. And I think we have to think about that challenge. Do we have the right funding mechanism for groundwater agencies to do the robust work that they need to do for us to be at the sustainability, the true sustainability level that we need to be by 2040 and hopefully sooner? The third thing is the timeliness of the challenge. If we're going to be way out of a long ways from sustainability in 2039 and think that somehow we're going to make it in 2040, I think that's just not, we all know that's not realistic. But my experience has been it is really easy with this to say, let's do the hard stuff later, and let's only nibble at the edges now. Let's do another study. Let's be sure. And I have, over the course of history in the United States, we have exploited resource after resource that way and have destroyed the resource usually. Fish stocks is a classic example. Fishermen wouldn't take a 10% cut, right? And because they wouldn't, suddenly they needed to take a 50% cut. Well, that's when the fishermen said, well, we'll take the 10% cut now. But now that wasn't good enough. And then you came back a few years later and the population dropped even more. And they said, now you've got to take a 90% cut. And they said, well, we'll take a 50% cut now. The same thing can happen with groundwater. It's certainly not exactly comparable. But the point is resource after resource in the history of the world has been exploited that way, delaying the hard. And so I hope that we have a sense of urgency that we can implement as we move forward. And then that leads me to the fourth thing, which is, I think, my greatest concern, and that is, as I look at groundwater sustainability agencies throughout the state, there's a great deal of variety in how they were formed. We gave local governments a tremendous amount of flexibility in how they were formed, but as with all situations, the people that had the most to lose had the most interest in having strong representation on those agencies. And that creates a built-in, not for every agency, but for many agencies, I should say, a strong incentive to delay, because the people that have the most to lose want to, and many people are more interested in the short-term gains that they get from that overpumping than they are in terms of us getting to long-term sustainability. So just want to call that out there. But conflicts of interest on groundwater sustainability agencies is a genuine issue and needs to be talked about openly, because in other government bodies, if you had the conflicts of interest that exist, I mean, alarm bells would be ringing off if you had it set up the way that it has been set up. So, and that affects all the other issues. It affects the fees. They don't want to charge a lot of fees. The regulated industry almost always wants to have a starved regulator agency out there. And so they don't charge high enough fees. Therefore, they don't have the technical knowledge that gives them justification for delaying action as it moves forward. So we certainly will have oversight hearings as we move forward. Want everybody to be aware of that as we try to deal with these challenges, not because we don't have well-intentioned people trying to get this done, but because this is so important and it has many challenges in terms of implementation. The final thing I'd say in terms of the overview is that we have decided to do this with lots of local control in terms of how we get this done. That politically is always the most advantageous in terms of implementation, but it does make it more difficult to come up with a coherent plan. And I would offer Australia as an example. After 10 years of severe drought and 2 years of extreme fires, they just said, we've got to nationalize this. And that's what will happen, and that's what we will have to do if this effort at letting the locals have a significant amount of influence. And so if people want to keep local control, they need to know that we have to be successful as we move forward.